Hey guys, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about the way I think about making change and what to me I see when I look out on the world of issues we have to deal with as a state, as a society, and the lens through which I think about how change can happen. And it's a little bit, I think, different than what a lot of people often talk about. So this will probably be a little bit of a longer video, but this is something I want to talk about. So to me, when we look at what's going on in the world, the issues I mention whenever I do one of these videos and the issues this campaign is about addressing, whether it's the climate crisis, whether it's the healthcare crisis, whether it is the racism and sexism that is rooted in some real structural problems in our society, whether it is the deep and growing wealth and income inequality in the world and in the country and in the state. We have to deal with these problems. And the thing is we already know what we need to do to solve these problems. When it comes to the climate crisis, we know that we need to leave behind fossil fuels and invest in renewable energy and move forward towards a more sustainable economy. But we're not really doing that anywhere near the pace we know we need to. The same thing is true with healthcare. We know very, very well that single-payer healthcare, Medicare for all, is a much, much more efficient and a much, much more effective and just headache-free way of administering healthcare to people. We know it saves businesses money and headaches because they don't have to worry about all these healthcare plans for their employees. It saves healthcare providers tons of headaches from dealing with insurance companies, and it makes it easier for people to get healthcare. We know for a fact it is a much better system, but we can't, for some reason, get to the point where we actually implement it. Same thing is true of every other issue. You could talk about how we know how to solve them, but we're having trouble doing it. So why is that? Why is it that we are not able as a society to make the progress we know how to make and we know we need to make? So the first part of that answer, in my view, is definitely the fact that we have a small number of people with a huge amount of wealth, which is a huge amount of power, in positions at the top of our society who are have a lot of control over how everything unfolds in our society. And you couple that incredible power with a shocking lack of empathy and a shocking lack of awareness and connection to what is happening to people as a result of their decisions at the rest of our society. That is, I think, when Bernie talks about the millionaires and the billionaires, he's talking about that problem. And that is certainly a big part of why we are stuck in so many ways. But you also got to ask yourself, why is it that when there are 99%, there are hundreds, millions, and billions of us who more or less know which way we need to go, and there's a very small number of people who are invested in preventing that direction, whether it's leaving behind fossil fuels, whether it's getting rid of the insurance grip on our healthcare system, whether it's protecting their incredible wealth that is just obscene. Why is it that we allow as a society that to happen? There are so many of us and and it's such a small number of people with this immense power. How do we break through that? How do we actually get over the hump and actually start to say, no, enough is enough. We're actually going to implement Medicare for all. We're actually going to implement the Green New Deal for Vermont, for the country, and leave behind fossil fuels. So that is a very, very tough question, and a question that I think we need to have a lot more of a conversation about. But the answer to, and now I'm going to go into why I think that is and what I think we can do about it, but the answer to me is definitely about, this is what it seems to me. It seems that societies tend to, they sort of begin to lose sight of what it is possible to achieve and to accomplish. we sort of, as a society, tend to lose our imaginations in a lot of ways. And just so you can kind of get a sense that it's not just me who's saying this, and a number of really great leaders of our times have been talking about that issue. I want to kind of give you some sense of what we're thinking about. So this is The Radical King. It's a book of King's speeches and writings, edited by Cornel West, actually. And this is a quote by Martin Luther King. He's actually referencing someone else in this quote, but he's talking about this issue that we're talking about here. This is what King wrote. He said, "Arnold Toynbee has said that some 26 civilizations have risen upon the face of the earth. Almost all of them have descended into the junk heaps of destruction. The decline and fall of these civilizations, according to Toynbee, was not caused by external invasions, but by internal decay. They failed to respond creatively to the challenges impinging upon them." So, civilizations have basically gone through this process, and when big challenges confronted them, they failed to respond creatively to them. And that was sort of their downfall. So that seems to me to be the path we're on. How do we reverse that? How do we change that? How do we allow ourselves to think creatively and to respond creatively to these big problems? Just to keep it going here and show you that this is really a problem that a lot of people are identifying and talking about, and I think we need to continue to talk about in the lens of all these crises and challenges that we're not effectively dealing with. This is another one. This is by Pope Francis. This book is called God is Young, and Pope Francis is really interesting to read just through the lens of philosophy and through the lens of not religious, but in the exact same way you would read King, and just thinking about social issues. And the way Pope Francis talks about this problem is he calls it single thought. He says we are in he says single thought is sort of how the slow homogenization of thinking in our society. We slowly start to put on our blinders and stop, and we forget that there's so much more that is possible, and we just get stuck and we say, okay, well, yeah, we have to save the planet, but maybe we just need to implement some carbon credits or something, and that'll move us in the right direction, forgetting that there's so much more we can do that is really really bold change that we can take. And on every issue, that sort of seems to be what happens. So this is what Pope Francis, how he explains it. He says, "I believe that our era is effectively one of single thought, and it is vital and urgent to disrupt this thought via creative imagination." It is vital and urgent to disrupt this thought via creative imagination. So when this campaign talks about creativity, when we talk about imagination, the organization I started, Democracy Creative, it is again about trying to figure out how we break through the single thought, the internal decay, and begin to recognize how much it is possible for us as a society to achieve and to accomplish, to move us forward toward justice, towards peace, and toward a more compassionate world and government. And there's a couple more quotes just to kind of tie it back together to the progressive movement and how this ties into, I think the progressive movement, we recognize that, again, the problem is the systems of power that are controlled by a handful of very wealthy people, very powerful people, who are not looking out for the interests of working people. And again, just to bring it back, this is a quote from Bernie. This was a tweet, but this is what he said. And just think about this. "The extraordinary power of the corporate establishment is not just over our economy and political life. It is over our imagination and our ability to envision a different kind of world." And when we slowly start to lose our ability to imagine how much better the world can be, when we slowly start to lose that creative thinking, what happens is that is it becomes much easier for that handful of very powerful people who have a vested interest in keeping things exactly the way they are. It becomes much easier for them to sell to us the vision of the world they want us to buy into. And whether that world is, again, that we have to stick to fossil fuels, that we have to stick to the unbelievably broken healthcare system. And it is only through, in my view, one of the things we have to do is foster this creativity in all of us to break through that and to not let that happen. And I'll just end it with this one other quote, which was from the Sanders Institute gathering, which I was I felt very lucky to be able to attend and to hear some of the incredible, inspiring people who spoke at that back in 2018 here in Burlington, Vermont. An amazing gathering of brilliant people from across the world. And this was actually by Susan Sarandon, who, as someone who's an activist and an artist, I think really grasps this concept of why creativity is so important for progressive change, for political change. And this is what Susan said. She said, "Imagination is an incredibly dangerous thing because you can't change anything if you can't imagine it. We have to go back to dreaming. We have to go back to imagining that things can change, and then they can change." So the point is that every kind of political change we're trying to create begins with all of us being able to imagine what that world looks like and helping others to be able to imagine it. And when our campaign says it is possible, that's what we are trying to get people to see. That as soon as enough of us recognize how much it is possible for us to change, that's when change is finally going to happen.